Welcome everyone to the Cool Davis Coalition quarterly meeting. We're just going to wait until a little bit while everybody assembles, and we'll start today with a business meeting, and then a little before 5 we'll start with our special topic today about local solutions for neighborhood resilience. So as you come in, we'd love it if you would put your name in the chat and tell us what neighborhood you're from. Even if you're not in a Davis neighborhood, it'll be nice to see where everybody's zooming in from. We have about 81 people that registered for today's event. So we're just really excited. I'm sure that a number of those people will be hoping to receive the video afterwards. So that will be fun to share more broadly in around our neighborhoods and throughout the city after this event is over with. And again, as you're entering, please put your name in the chat and tell us what neighborhood you're from. It's really great to see all these faces. And we're really glad that you were able to join us today. We're going to start here in a minute or two just with our business meeting and have all of our working groups just share a little bit about what's happening with them before we start the main program for today. So it would be helpful to me if our working group leaders, if you would put your hand up, then I'll know who I can call on to cover all the different groups today. So if you know how to put your hand up in Zoom, please do that now if you're going to be reporting for your working group. Not seeing any hands today. I
think I see at least one hand, Chris. Okay. I think Alan Hirsch has got his hand up and Larry Gunther has his hand up.
Okay, so Larry's going to come last. But Alan, why don't you go ahead to talk about YOLO mobility?
You are on mute, Alan.
Thank you, but I'm not worrying about trees. I'm worrying about the transportation, improving transportation alternatives. We have found that 71% of our carbon footprint is from driving, but like 60% of the total is that driving, like 60% of our carbon footprint is from people who commute in and out of the city. And most of that is on I-80. And they are a project to increase the capacity of I-80, be a managed lane, or it could be widening with additional capacity to encourage people to drive further. There is a public meeting next Wednesday, virtual public meeting. You need to call in if you are concerned about the widening, which might increase the greenhouse gas in our region and our state. That'd be an appropriate thing to listen to and to call in to make sure those lanes are bus lanes, managed lanes, and to make sure that money goes to get money to fund YOLO bus and Solano bus to operate buses on those lanes, not just build those lanes. So that's what we're working on right now. In addition to welcoming the wonderful new executive director to YOLO bus, Autumn Bernstein. She's from the Bay Area, and she's joining a small but mighty staff. I heard at the last meeting that Lucas is on the board there, and we're excited about what she's going to bring in terms of bringing multimodalism to YOLO County. So that's the things we're focusing on, and hope you can all dial into I-80 because that's the big one in terms of climate in our region.
Thanks, Alan.
I've got a question for Alan as Richard. So Alan, is there a link to that meeting someplace you could send me to?
Yeah, I'll put one up in the chat, okay?
That'd be great.
There was
Good.
something of the enterprise today, but the link was about as long as my arm. So I'll send you, I'll copy and paste it into the chat. Thank you so much.
Richard, how about you go next? Talk a little bit about DEVA.
Okay, ties right into that. So the Davis Electric Vehicle Association still continues to have our bi-monthly meetings. And our last meeting was last week. Actually, we got a fairly good turnout, but I have to admit, Zoom is getting a little tiring for people. And I think people really want to get out and look at cars and talk about new cars. And so one of the things Chris and I have talked about is actually seeing how comfortable people would be in this kind of our current climate, health climate, of basically doing some show and tells, not exactly taking people on driving rides, but basically doing a show and tell where they can walk around your car and you can talk to them. But I think just from what we had in our last meeting, I got a lot of interest of people really wanted to talk more about it. And it kind of gets back to what Alan was talking about too. Electric vehicles would take a good punch out of a lot of the commuting miles. I always see these comments about people with trucks and they use it for their work and EVs not, but all that traffic, most of that traffic on I-5 is people going Bay Area and Sacramento back and forth. So anyway, so that's what we're gonna spend more time on.
Thanks, Richard. Did you want to give people a heads up about National Drive Electric Week?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a lot on that. You might have more than I do. So, so usually we have a National Drive Electric Week. I think they're going to try it again this year. I didn't get a chance to really tie into what they're planning on. And in the past, what we've done is we've done some nice show and tells, and still that's part of what we have to figure out how comfortable people are. But that's a good time for nationwide people to come out and talk about electric cars. And right now there's so many new models out there. I think this would be a great time to go out and talk about that. And so, do you have anything to add for me, Chris?
Yeah, like last year, National Drive Electric Week overlaps with National Solar Tour weekend. And so our local theme is driving on sunshine, and we're going to try and do some things both on Zoom and maybe in person. Stay tuned to kind of connect the two, both electrifying your ride with your own power source on your roof. So I see Jim Kramer, and I'm wondering if he might be able to speak to what's happening with the Interfaith Alliance. Unless Lynn Nittler's in the room, I can't see her on the list yet.
Well, I'll start, but Ann Privateer and others are on that. Jan attended our last meeting. So we continue to meet monthly, and for the last several months, a lot of our effort has been trying to think of what we should be doing. Because for a number of years, we put on annual conferences and that took up a lot of our effort, but that has stopped partly because of overkill and partly the COVID and so on. Anyway, we're trying to organize a possible speaker series and thinking of other events and ways to get the faith communities involved with climate change and Cool Davis. Anne, do you have things to add, or Jan?
I would just add that I know that there are a number of congregations in the area that have been doing some really good work with solar. And I know that congregation Bet Havarim is interested in exploring solar for its campus. And I would hope that we have a board champion who is interested in bringing that to our board. And I'm hoping, I know that Jerry Braun is one of the people who's done a lot with his congregation, as has the Unitarians. And I'm wondering if we might, as part of our group, have a conversation. I will put it on the agenda to talk about how congregations are moving forward with responding to climate change, both on their campuses and with their congregations. I think that's an important vehicle for us to get messages out to. And we also talked about, if I'm not mistaken, Jim, how we could create a document that could be put in each of the bulletins that each respective congregation participating in this could get into their bulletins, their weekly bulletins.
Okay, I see Elizabeth, you have your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and the speed is okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, so a few things. Our park management is just about finished with putting solar panels over our RV storage areas and they will proceed with putting solar on the clubhouse and an annex, and those solar panels will be used to power all the communal areas of the park, except for the heating of the pools. Will not power individual homes though. So in order to do the solar panels, some trees went down, were cut down, and some trees have been replanted. So that's good news. We participated in the city climate action and adaptation plan input. So we had a pretty robust conversation with Carrie Lux, which we're pleased. We will be having a native plant sale in Rancho Yellow in October, early October, from a mobile native plant nursery. You know, they have a truck or a van or something that goes around and has these mobile nursery sales. And then we are working with, I think Anthony is on this Zoom, but we are working with Anthony and the Davis Bike Campaign to bring on a roll the Trishaw project to Rancho Yellow. It will be one of the 3 or 4 sites that will have this electrified 3-wheel kind of bike to take seniors on rides in the community, but it is all pedal power and electric powered. So I think Anthony probably will talk more about that. And I think that's kind of it for where we are. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Do we have, I know that we have, Larry Gunther is going to talk for Tree Davis. But is there anyone else from any of our other partners that has something to share, or one of our working groups? And if there isn't anyone else, Larry, you're on.
Okay, thank you. And I have two things to report. One, reporting for Leslie Crenna, who organized the Greywater Showcase and sends her best from vacation land. I'm not sure where she is, but that was a great event and super fun. Tree Davis has been working with Waterwise Davis, a subgroup of Cool Davis, to try and get Greywater ordinance and get more people using that. Super important as we get less and less water from the Sierra. And Tree Davis has been working with the city of Davis. I think Lucas has been working on that for a climate ready tree list, and also just doing climate ready landscapes. So branching out beyond just trees for Tree Davis, pun intended, to try and get more complete landscapes that are drought tolerant and better prepared for our coming climate. We also are, Tree Davis is also looking for interns. So if you want a chance to intern, participating in technical design and learning about climate change projections in the region, engaging neighborhoods, leading community volunteers, all that kind of thing, you can reach out to Tree Davis. We would love to hear from you. And I think that's about it. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And I see that Scott Stewart has his hand up. So go ahead, Scott. Want to tell us a little bit about what's going on with YCEC?
Sure. And sorry, I'm late. Yes, I just wanted to let the group know that YCEC, Yellow Climate Emergency Coalition, is working now in a capacity that is a post Yellow County Climate Action Commission having formed, and that was a big objective for YCEC and for the community as well. So we appreciate all of the people who have stepped forward to endorse the formation of the Climate Commission at the county level. There are now 5 appointed representatives to the commission, one from each district. They're looking for 4 more. And if you all know of anyone who's interested, they have until midnight tonight to fill out an application with the county. Although I do think the county should try to extend the time frame for at-large commissioners. There are 4 at-large commissioners. 1 is a social justice commissioner, and the other 3 are general at-large commissioners. Then they'll hopefully be assigning 2 more commissioners that are technical, and then 1 advisory from the University of California, Davis. Obviously we couldn't have had a commission like this set up any later. Fortunately, we were a little bit ahead of it, and through the pandemic that started in March of 2020, we've been working steadily to have that occur. We'd also like to let folks know that we are looking for additional participants to support some of the grant work that is going on now with Comita Digna, which is a food justice and sovereignty effort that will be branching out from YCEC and will be a county regional effort. That's pretty much it. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Good to hear the latest. If you want to drop the link to the application into the chat for people,
Okay.
I think that would be terrific. Thanks.
Yeah.
Let's see. We are 2 or 3 minutes out from getting started with our next part of our meeting. I wanted to welcome officially Lucas Frerichs, our Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Davis, who agreed to join us for what little time he had today to help with emceeing and introducing our speakers. We're really glad that you could join us today, Lucas. And I think we'll give folks a few more minutes. We expect that there will be another group of people that join the meeting just around approaching 5 o'clock. So I think if there's any other things that people that are here in the audience would like to share, either things that might be going on in your neighborhood or other activities related to sustainability that you would like to share with the group, we have a couple of minutes.
Well, I'll add one, Chris. So this is Richard. And so one of the things that came up, because I think I was talking to Chris in a previous meeting about, our neighborhood, and normally it's pretty quiet, but we have a tremendous amount of traffic coming from Woodland that comes through. And actually they cut through one of our streets, I think on their way to I-80. So it's like Davis has become the kind of Highway 5 to I-80 kind of pass through. And I wonder how much emissions that adds, not just in greenhouse gases, but also in just local air pollution that we have and noise. I'd love to hear I'd love to hear whether the city's even looked at that. I'm sure they have in a lot of areas, and I'm sure it kind of ties into what happens in South Davis with some of those, the mobile apps that show people how to cut from I-80 down through Dixon and up through Mace and all the crowding they have there. Again, it's traffic that's coming off I-80. So anyway, just another transportation issue and how it affects some of our communities.
Thanks, Richard. I can see a rather lengthy post in the chat from Tom Phillips, who is one of our local air quality experts, not unlike Richard. And he specializes in indoor air quality. And just recently we had a workshop on August 1st that was focused on home energy retrofit. And a big emphasis in that workshop was getting off of natural gas. And so I'm thrilled to see Tom here today and some of the things he's sharing with us about the connection between some of the things we want to do with greenhouse gas reduction and just indoor health and air quality. So thanks, Tom, for those resources. And I don't know if you want to just say something quickly, that would be great.
Yeah, hi everybody. See some new friends, so it's great. Sorry, we were out of town when you had your workshops, and I couldn't sneak away to tune in, but I'll check in with you later, I guess. Yeah, I'm just highlighting this kind of growing grassroots interest in middle and high income people that I run into that want to electrify and reduce wildfire smoke impacts and GHGs and so on. So I started to pull together some guidance for them. I mainly just wanted to mention, which you may have seen from Marin Community Energy, they, with PUC funding, they did this pilot project earlier this year on multifamily low-income retrofits and electrification. And so, you're probably aware of it, but maybe there's more PUC money to do that kind of thing in Yolo County and so on. So that would be great, because there were a lot of not only energy and carbon benefits, but non-energy benefits as well. So I just thought I'd mention that. But thanks again for putting these events on.
Thank you. It's good to see you. Okay, so we're just a few minutes out here, and I expect that we will be adding a few more people. Alan, you still have your hand up. Did you want to ask something?
I'm sorry, I meant to I can't figure out how to take it down. Okay, lower it down. There we go. If I can make an announcement about something, but only if I don't want to derail anything.
There's another hand up as well, by the way.
Yes, I saw that. The.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Cathy Forkas. I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
on a
here's
new
Cathy.
device.
Awesome.
Hi. I'm on a new device here, and so I guess I don't have my name in there. Just call me Squid. So anyway, I'm just actually checking my sound because I was not able to hook up with the technical people. Just making sure you can hear me okay for when I do
Yes,
speak.
absolutely. And I'm going to change your
Okay.
name for you.
Thank you. Awesome. I'm not on a regular computer and I'm on the wrong format and it's kind of a problem, but I'm away from home. So I'm doing the best I can.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Cathy. We're glad you could join us. All right.
So now it says,
I have
now it
something to
says
say
Squid
now.
Forkas.
Right.
I have something to say now. The tail of the Lorax was all alone and all the trees were felled. And we are trying to save Sutter trees. Phase 1 is gone through. They've already cut the trees without, there was no public notice on the first level of cutting. We now have phase 2 of cutting. There's a change.org petition up to save the trees. And we have a hearing on September 21st. And there's also a public discussion with the tree commission on August 31st. We don't have a support for our urban forestry program, and we're allowing trees to be cut without even public involvement. Solar panels are important. We can have solar panels and trees. I really urge people to get involved. The elephant is in the room. We want to make this just about, if people want to let the trees go, that's fine, but this is a chance to basically speak up and defend our urban forestry program, which has been neglected for years. We've asked for a new tree protection ordinance for 14 years, and it hasn't come forward. The tree program is now overpromising and under-delivering. It's a constant problem. This is the chance to basically make your voice heard, that the trees are an important value in Davis, and the people in the city hall can't just approve cutting down 205 trees without involving the public. So there's my advertisement. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We're going to get started with our special presentations. Lucas, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you all today. I'm not sure if the elephant in the room is a reference to me, or I've lost 60 pounds in the past year, so I'm looking less and less like an elephant every day. But all kidding aside, it's great to see you all and spend some time together. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to host this event today, or co-host this event with Cool Davis. I first want to, we'll talk about the agenda in just a second, but I want to turn this over to Robin Kozlov, who's going to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Here we go. Hey, Chris, there's a black line over the final point. Okay. As we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: the Kachil-Dihi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzal-Dihi-Wintun Nation, and the Yocha-Dihi-Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands.
Thank you very much, Robin, for that. I appreciate that very important land acknowledgement. So before we kick off and sort of introduce our speakers, we're just going to do a quick review of the agenda. First, we've obviously just heard this land acknowledgement, and I'm going to just do an introduction here in a moment of our speakers today: Lorenzo Kristov, Sascha van Meier, and also Mark Lakeman, but then also be followed by a panel of local responses. Lorenzo Kristov is going to serve as moderator, and Cathy Forkas, Emily Griswold, and Elizabeth Lasensky are going to sort of serve as their local responses. And so I think think, and that will be from about 6:10, excuse me, and 6:30, we'll have lots of opportunity for question and A with members of the audience and all those that are here today. Quick reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. Start putting them in the chat. And we will, there are folks on participating today that are actually, there's a Google Doc going, and all the questions that are being put in the chat are being compiled. And so folks will have an opportunity. We'll get through as many of those questions as possible. So before I do a quick introduction here of our speakers today, our featured speakers, I just want to say that I think this is a very timely conversation for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, let's look outside and see the air quality today. It's horrible, of course, due to the wildfires that are happening in nearby communities. But also, I think, the reality is this is a pattern that we're seeing, of course, and is obviously a very alarming pattern. I think also the IPCC report, if that didn't scare the living daylights out of everyone in reading it, it should, because it yet again highlights that the coming climate catastrophe is upon us, and it's likely to probably get worse in the future. And so we all know that community resilience and even more so neighborhood resilience is going to be one of the ways to work to sort of combat the issues and the effects of changing climate. I think that in Davis, we're working on a lot of these issues already. There's certainly much more to do, no question. And that's in part why we're having a discussion like this today. But there are many efforts. The city's current downtown plan is going through the final phases, almost finished. The update, of course, right now of the city's climate and action and adaptation plan. We obviously heard an update a bit earlier about the efforts underway at the county. And then, of course, the final part of this for the city in terms of updates and plans and sort of path forward is an updated general plan, which is also underway and coming over as we start to wrap up the update of the climate action and adaptation plan. So I think that I also would say there are examples. Davis Manor is a good example. Davis Manor neighborhood, Old East Davis. There are a bunch of neighborhoods that are already working on their respective neighborhood resilience efforts, and so we will be able to hear from some of those folks from different neighborhoods later at the end of this presentation today, in the panel remarks. So with that, I will kick off just introducing our first speaker, is Lorenzo Kristov. Lorenzo is a Davis resident, of course, many folks know him, but has professionally worked in energy policy for 3 decades in California, nationally and internationally. He's currently working to revise California's policies and regulations to enable local governments, tribes, and communities to deploy local electricity resources to power essential services when the utility grid suffers outages, and to provide local clean energy benefits year-round. And a key part of this effort is Senate Bill 99, authored by our own State Senator Bill Dodd, which is currently going through the California legislature and in the Assembly, and it will provide funding and technical support for local governments to do community energy resilience planning. Lorenzo was a part of a group of energy experts in Davis that advocated for community choice energy and which led to the formation of Valley Clean Energy. He also serves on the City of Davis's Utilities Commission, as well as the Valley Clean Energy Community Advisory Committee. Lorenzo, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Lucas, for that introduction, and thanks, Chris and Robin and others for organizing this event. I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to switch immediately into screen sharing mode because I have a short presentation to introduce some concepts for today's panel. And let's see, here's the share screen button. And with luck, you should all be seeing my PowerPoint presentation now. How is that? You all seeing a slide that says climate resilience for neighborhoods and cities?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I want to introduce some basic ideas about resilience. I've been thinking about it for a long time. In the industry that I work in, which is the electric power industry, Resilience has been a hot topic now for many years, but it means different things to different people. So I want to start out with just some basic ideas that put us all sort of on the same page with some of the terminology we're using. Resilience, it's simply, as I think about it, is the ability to maintain essential quality of life functions and perform emergency services when a severe stress or a disruption occurs. That's the context we're dealing in. We're aware that the volatility of environmental disruptions is increasing, getting more frequent, harder to predict. So how do we prepare for that? The idea is that when a severe stress or a disruptive event occurs, we need to be prepared to provide for things like water supply, shelter, food, medical care, rescue, safety and security, wastewater, communications. You can add more to those things, but moral support, so psychological and social support. And when I say shelter, that also doesn't explicitly say it, but think extreme cold and extreme heat. In Texas last February, about 200 people died because they had no place to go and they froze or they asphyxiated trying to avoid freezing. So it's those kinds of things when the power system goes out. And in my view, and I've worked in this industry for 30 years, no matter how much we invest in the power grid, there will be times when it fails. So we need to plan for it when that service is not available. Disruptive events always have local and often fatal impacts, but they're local, they're on the ground, they affect us where we live, they affect our neighborhoods, and they're very immediate. So that means that the solutions and the preparations also need to be local. And then finally, I'll distinguish between resilience and sustainability. Simple way I think about it, sustainability means stop making things worse, stop doing more damage to our environment, to our ecosystems. A lot of that has to do with getting off of fossil fuels, but it also means things like cutting down on throwaway plastics, sending less stuff to the dump and recycling, and many, many other dimensions. But it means changing the practices that we enact in daily life that degrade our ecosystems and our climate cycles and transition to better alternatives that don't do that damage. It's a longer term process. It will unfold over years to change all of the behaviors that we do that are damaging. Whereas resilience is prepare for the impacts of the damage that's already been done. No matter how quickly we get off fossil fuels, we could stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, but we've set damage in motion that's going to play out for the next couple of decades before things stabilize again. So sustainability, stop making things worse, resilience, prepare for the impacts of the damage that's already been done. Now, I like to think about a lot of things about learning from nature. And nature employs what I call a layered architecture of resilience. And I think this is useful when we think about resilience in our own society. An individual cell is a complex living system, and it has its own capabilities for resilience. It has a membrane with which it interchanges materials and information with the outside world. It has internal energy plants where it takes nutrients and it converts them into energy for growth and other activities. So it does its own thing, and it has its own ways of maintaining its integrity as an entity. At the same time, the cell, say a cell that's in your body, is part of a larger structure, in this case, a heart, and it contributes through what it does into the function of the heart. So it looks out for its own thing, but it's also part of a larger function. And then similarly, the heart is, in this case, part of a human body, and the human body is another complex system at a higher level, a complex living system that also has integrity, interaction with the outside world, various control systems with which it maintains stability, and so on. But then we don't stop there, because each of us as a person is not just complete unto ourselves. We're part of social networks. We're part of a neighborhood, a family, a larger society at many different levels. And of course, I'm just picking highlights here. We go all the way up to the entire Earth, which is also a complex living system. At every one of these layers, one could ask, well, what is resilience? And the answer is, one, that you need to think about resilience at every level, and these systems at every layer have resilience mechanisms and strategies. But then also the resilience at the lower levels contributes to the resilience at the higher levels. So now the next thing is, let's translate that into our social systems and our daily behaviors. Take the layered architecture of community resilience. And in this case, a nice diagram that my friend Bob Perry, who works for World Business Academy, created a while ago, just to show the concentric circles, starting with a house in the middle, and then going out to your neighborhood and your city, and then the county or bioregion, and then up to the state. And of course, you can keep going beyond that to the nation and international agreements and so on, but we'll just stop at the state level. At the house level, individual households, things like physical and mental health, practicing energy efficiency, charging your EV, minimizing waste, gray water, et cetera. At the next level up, what can we do at the neighborhood? Be more self-reliant through sharing cars and tools, local food production and chicken coops, places to meet and gather and have conversations as a community, places to celebrate events where we get together with our neighbors, free cycle facilities capturing rainwater. Go up to the next level at the municipality, systemic integration of critical services. And there the municipality is, of course, responsible for things like water supply and wastewater and emergency services and many things that are properties or services of local government. But all of those have resilience properties to them. In many ways, the common denominator here is becoming more locally self-reliant so that we're less dependent on macro systems that can suffer vulnerabilities and fragility, as we experienced at the beginning of COVID, when there was something of a shortage of protective equipment because we didn't produce enough locally. Going up to the bioregion, which would be Yolo County and a number of surrounding neighborhood counties, or watershed is often the term that's used, local food production, local systems for waste management and recycling, for water management, et cetera, thinking about frontline communities that may not be right in our city, but are not far away. And then finally, at the state level, we look for things like policies and funding to enable the lower levels of resilience to play out, because many of the strategies that we want to adapt require investment and effort and technical expertise and so on, where the state can play a major role in enabling those things to happen. Finally, down to the last slide, and then I'm done. How do we think about the economy? And my training here, what brought me to UC Davis was to get a PhD in economics, which I did back in the early 90s. And thinking about what I learned, there are ways in which the economic system that really guides most policy at the federal and state level, and even to some degree locally, is really based on models that are in conflict with resilience and sustainability and equity. Conventional economics emphasizes more all the time, more consumption, more profits, more waste. I see it in the electricity business where people talk about energy efficiency. And while a lot has been accomplished in California in energy efficiency, there's also a lot of resistance to doing more because it's antithetical to our economics ethic, which is to grow and sell more, produce more, consume more. So, and it's just premised on the idea that consuming more makes us better off. But the fact is that it reaches a point where now consuming more is really causing the damage that we're trying to deal with. And another aspect of the more economy is that it really does artificially lower prices because it externalizes costs and hides impacts. And we all know about the health impacts on communities that are located near fossil fuel processing plants or nuclear power plants. There's all sorts of evidence about how environmental degradation really affects subsets of the population who don't have the wealth or the ability to avoid those things. Well, those are real costs that somebody pays, and the prices that we pay for things don't reflect those costs most of the time. So everything looks too cheap, and therefore we buy buy more of it. That's part of what is wrong with the economic system we live in. So what's the alternative? Something that I like very much and I'd like you all to be aware of is called donut economics, which was created by an economist, Kate Rayworth, in England about 8 or 10 years ago. And the model here is very simple. It looks complicated, but the idea is that the goal of economic policy ought to be staying in the green zone. And the green zone is the shape of the donut in which we're interacting with our environment appropriately and providing for the needs of everybody. So if you're inside the hole in the center, that means there's a shortfall on things that people need to live a healthy and successful and satisfying life. Basics like water, food, health, energy, networking, housing, gender equality, social equity, political voice. Wherever we're in that red zone internally, it means that somebody is suffering a shortfall of those things. When we're outside, that's where we're exceeding the carrying capacity of the earth that we live on. And climate change obviously is one of them, but it's not the only one. It's ocean acidification, chemical pollution, air pollution, loss of biodiversity, and so on. So we want to enact policies and behaviors that shrink the outside back to that ecological ceiling and expand the inside so that we get to the social foundation for everyone. And then I'll finally leave you with this quote that inspired me a long time ago as I was reading Buckminster Fuller. In order to change an existing paradigm, you do not struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete. And that really is the kickoff point or the point of departure for the next speakers. And at this time, I will stop sharing and turn this agenda over to, I guess Sascha is up next. Are we going back to you, Lucas, for introduction?
Just a quick interlude and a quick introduction. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just as a quick reminder to folks attending, please post your questions for Lorenzo in the chat so we can queue them up for our Q&A time. And with that, though, I'll just turn right into the introduction for Sascha von Meier. She is the EcoBlock Program Director, Electric Grid Research at the California Institute for Energy and the Environment, as well as an adjunct professor in the Department of Electric Engineering and Computer Sciences at UC Berkeley. She's the EcoBlock project principal investigator, and she's passionate about climate action and how EcoBlocks might help us get to our carbon goals faster and more equitably. With a BA in physics and a PhD in energy and resources from UC Berkeley, Sascha has been studying ways to incorporate more solar energy in the grid, into the electric grid since 1989. And her other current research projects focus on advanced sensors, data analytics, and control approaches, all of which can help better coordinate variable resources like solar and wind. She's also working on the second edition of her popular textbook, Electric Power Systems, A Conceptual Introduction. And prior to her time at UC Berkeley, from 1999 to 2011, she was a professor of energy management and design at Sonoma State University, where she directed the Green Building Certificate program. So welcome, Sascha. We're so happy to have you today.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Is my video and audio all good?
Absolutely,
and
yes.
All I need is a little bit of a heads up of whether I'm still aiming for about 15 minutes, starting a little late here. I trust you'll give me a 2-minute warning.
That sounds great. Absolutely, we'll do.
Great. So let me get right into it about the Oakland EcoBlock project. I am so pleased here to be preaching to the converted, really. I won't belabor what we all know to be true and what Lorenzo has described, I think, very eloquently. I'll just add a quote from John Holdren, former Berkeley professor and Obama science advisor. He said, "We need to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable when it comes to climate." So also amen to what Lorenzo said about the electric grid. It's not whether it may fail, but when it does fail, we need to make sure that human beings are taken care of. So that includes the most vulnerable members of our society. That brings up the issue of equity along with climate and resilience. So we understand the science of what we need to do. In the energy sector, it starts with efficiency, using less, doing more with less. using renewables, decarbonized resources, and also shifting over from natural gas to electricity that's easier and cheaper to decarbonize than fuels. It means we have to be able to survive extreme events and make sure that the access to the tools to survive these extreme events is available for all. So the EcoBlock project is looking at this with a very ambitious vision about greening our cities in a really multidisciplinary way. The way that we're building this project is not yet ideal. It doesn't yet cover all these bases, but we are trying. The hypothesis is that the most cost-effective way to get to where we need to go with climate resilience and equity is to address these different dimensions of people, energy, water, transportation together. We also hypothesize that there's a sweet spot in the physical scale of aggregation. Rather than making changes, for example, to an individual home, we think it may be more cost effective to retrofit entire groups of homes at once, to build microgrids, community microgrids that can share solar and energy storage resources, for example, where you get some of the benefit of load diversity or statistics working in your favor, where when you band together, you can do more with less. To bring the convenience that some of us can afford with a Tesla Powerwall, to make that accessible to everyone, where perhaps you can't even power everything in your house during a power outage, but you can focus and prioritize on the most important things. And we believe this will be cheaper to do when we aggregate. A block or a neighborhood may be just about right. An entire city or county may be too big. It gets complicated. There's many more jurisdictional issues to deal with. So we're building this experiment of a multi-customer microgrid in the city of Oakland, starting with a retrofit of older housing stock, a group of 33 properties, some rentals, some single-family homes, people who in some cases barely knew each other are forming a community association to co-own these solar microgrid assets and work with PG&E to enable this block to function even when there's an outage in the macrogrid. That involves innovative legal and financial structures. The idea is, of course, this model should be replicable when there isn't a research group facilitating this. We hope that the costs of this can be brought down. Right now, it's a multi-million-dollar research experiment, and we are looking at how is this going to scale once there are examples and precedents, and we can coast on economies of scale of design and construction and operation and governance. So crucial partners in this, there are too many project team members to list besides UC Berkeley leading this, but crucial partners really are the City of Oakland and PG&E, who are, I want to say, innovating with us at a pace that's slower than many of us in the microgrid community might prefer, but also really in good faith and taking one step at a time to do something that's actually pretty radical from a distribution utility standpoint, and that is to open a switch during a disturbance and allow a block to be electrically on their own with their own resources, sharing power across property lines. Now, how the whole billing and tariff works is a whole other problem that we probably won't have time to get into. But overview of the project, we completed, along with a number of other advanced energy communities projects, a phase one that was an exploratory study of feasibility, looking at what could one reasonably build. Then we started phase two last year with recruiting the actual block where we're building this, specifying the hardware and software for what we're really going to build on this block, looking at physical construction starting in early 2022. And then phase 2 will end in 2023 with sort of evaluating how this works. And in the meantime, we have a team thinking about how can this idea be scaled up. The biggest product really will be a lessons learned document about choices we had, what we did, where we went wrong, things that one might do under different circumstances, for example, a different community, different climate zone, and so on. Ideally, this will culminate in something that can be replicated as perhaps a nonprofit business. Right now, we're focused on building this pilot block in Oakland. There are experts from all different disciplines in this, on energy, professional community outreach and facilitators, planners, design and construction companies. Mobility is a piece of this because we envision having shared EVs charged by the microgrid. Water efficiency, we're not going quite as far as we might like in terms of gray water use, but at least we'll have some water efficiency and stormwater mitigation measures, and obviously a lot of legal and business and finance work. Right now, we've done in-home assessments, starting with, looking at what can be within reason retrofit in each of these homes, again, from different ages, different sizes. We don't have money to do window upgrades, but we're doing insulation, we're doing energy efficient appliances, we're shifting gas heating over to efficient electric heat pumps, induction cooking, LED lighting, and so forth. And on the water side, stormwater mitigation. In fact, I have to tell you, my favorite piece of the governance story is that we already had a vote with everyone who lives on the block about which of several candidate designs they preferred for basically beautifying and making more functional the street with the water runoff. And that was sort of our first test of the collective democratic decision-making on the block, so that once the university walks away, this community will have that robust governance process in place. And with we're hoping for the interconnection study with PG&E to be completed this year and to break ground on microgrid construction in early next year. We initially contemplated a DC microgrid where there would be DC connections between rooftop solar and batteries behind the meter. That's still a big stretch in the existing state regulatory structure. We actually believe it would be legal to do, but others disagree. It turns out that PG&E was ready at this point to contemplate this community microgrid situation where it is permitted to form an intentional power island with a grid forming inverter, one big storage battery resource with about 120 kilowatt grid forming inverter, and then solar spread out over all the rooftops as much as we can fit everywhere, with grid following inverters and some additional smaller batteries at the individual homes. And the idea is that this whole block can safely island. It should be able to ride through a typical hour-long or day-long outage. It could operate indefinitely with its solar resources with some curtailment of load. So managing the demand side is a crucial piece of this, and being able to curtail with intelligent prioritization so people can use the stuff that's important. So the strategic innovation here is, as I said, the islanding capability. It's to avoid that moment, which I'm afraid will come when we have a catastrophic widespread power outage. We have gigawatts of solar power installed all across people's rooftops and no way to use that solar power. I think that will be a great tragedy that we should work to prevent by finding ways for solar capacity to be recruited, both for grid services in blue sky conditions and for these emergency conditions. We think that shaping the electric demand on this block scale will help the integration of more solar and electric vehicles, and that ultimately we hope this will be one way to facilitate retiring the natural gas infrastructure. Some of the big challenges are not technical, but social in nature. We're working with a block where people basically have a very positive, open-minded attitude about this, not necessarily prior expertise. So there's education involved, 7 different languages. Sometimes we have interpreters. There's questions about what is this going to cost us? We're going to save money. Well, these participants should save some money because the California Energy Commission EPIC funds are paying for the hardware. In the future, a scalable model will have to involve affordable financing for an association like this so that they could buy the solar and the batteries and the efficient appliances themselves and finance that with the energy savings that they'll get. So right now we're setting the bar in a much easier place, just making sure that these participants will be left financially whole, still without being able to give them an exact dollar figure. It's a challenging process of building trust, again, because this community isn't, one of the wealthier communities where people don't worry about their utility bills. So trust building is a big part of this project, looking at the the regulatory context. First of all, so we've established actually a community association that's already incorporated, has a steering committee, will formalize bylaws. So we want to set an example for that whole process, making sure that the individual participants will be protected. Nobody's going to lose their house. But at the, scaling up in Lorenzo's fractal layers, really at the aggregate level, there are some really big challenges to be addressed about how would we facilitate or encourage such microgrids amongst different utility customers to be built so that people can share resources, not for profit, but really for health and safety and resilience. So I believe there's a lot of work to be done on the tariff side. And there's, I think, a growing coalition of folks really advocating for innovation and experimentation.
Just
in the microgrid field.
Pop in, Sascha, just give a two-minute warning. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think this is next to my last slide. Why is this hard? Because a lot of different people have to work together and trust each other. And really the best we can do is to have a very transparent process with all of our partners and the entities we work with, including the commissions and the utility and the participants, and just sort of recognize that we're all in this to learn. There is a big team, again, with experts from all different fields, and it's really a privilege to be able to present this work to you. I hope that in a year from now, I can point to an actual physical microgrid in operation. So I'm done.
Thank you very much, Sascha. Wow, so much information in your presentation, and also so exciting to hear what's going on in Oakland. So we look forward to, just a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, I know I saw at least 1 or 2 pop in the chat already, to queue them up for when we get to the panel and the Q&A session. So we're going to go now to actually our third panelist, and actually it's Mark Lakeman. And actually Mark was not able to be here in person with us today, but he pre-recorded a presentation for us that we will queue up now, and I will just do a brief bio of Mark. Many of you may know Mark because of his previous visits to Davis. He's the founder of the nonprofit placemaking movement organization known as the City Repair Project. And he's also principal design director of the community architecture and planning firm Communitecture. And he is a urban placemaker and permaculture designer, a community design facilitator, and inspiring catalyst in his very active commitment to the emergence of sustainable cultural landscapes everywhere. So we are really happy to have him be with us via pre-recorded video today. We unfortunately couldn't be here again, but really appreciate his willingness to participate, even though not here live with us. But we will queue up the video now, and then after that we will go to the we'll get ready to do the panel presentation after that.
Okay, Chris, you want me to share from my computer?
Yes.
Here we go. Okay, and I think
Hi, this is Mark Lakeman with the City Repair Project and Communitecture in Portland, Oregon. And I'm providing a presentation to you folks in Davis, and I'm very happy to do so. I understand that you have a lot of different concerns in mind, particularly related to climate change and other things. The presentation I'm going to give today, hopefully I will keep it within 15 minutes, but we'll see, is related to our work, particularly in public space in Portland, Oregon. But now it's kind of prototypes have moved across the continent to more than 100 cities. So I need to kind of explain the most kind of ground level initial aspirations that we had, and then talk about projects. And so I'll be relating a lot of different things today. In particular, I wanted to relate that one of our aspirations through placemaking has been to affect the way that we think about reducing carbon emissions. And a lot of people look at the work that we do in streets, the ordinances that we've managed to inspire passage of in many different cities, to repurpose streets, or to, especially you could think of it as broadening the diversity of uses in the public right of way. So
Lorenzo, can you unmute your
challenges related to climate change? We obviously want to be working off of some solid assumptions, and sometimes the assumptions we've found and we see might not be helpful in actually arriving at solutions. Like, for instance, I'm a very big believer and proponent of multimodal transit, accommodating all kinds of different ways for people to be able to move around. But at the same time, to me, the untapped horizon, which is really right where you stand, is to enable people to tap into the vast skills and talents that reside in every neighborhood. In fact, I can't really take you through all of the steps in this trajectory, but we now understand that every single neighborhood is infused with the full skill set of skills and talents that really powers the entire society. And one of, I think, the dysfunctions of our culture is many of them are actually based on the idea that that our culture is predicated on leaving where we live to go elsewhere all the time to earn livelihood. And one thing we're trying to engender is a localization effect through our work to repurpose streets, to basically retrofit neighborhoods with the gathering places that developers, bankers, political leaders didn't think to create, or didn't care to create, or frankly didn't want to create at the onset of most American communities. So part of our plight is that we actually have to save money and fly across the ocean to visit places that are actually more expressive of local human culture, where you can, you know, see this integration. What comes out of the integration, of course, are you know, vastly lower crime rates and vastly increased public health statistics. And so, of course, naturally, a lot of people look to, a lot of designers and sociologists, anthropologists, and decision makers look to other circumstances for inspiration. And what we're doing is we're looking at place-based people a lot of time to see what, you know, what is the best outcome that might result from community participation. So, okay, I'm going to do a screen share and just take you as fast as I can through some images. Here we go. Okay. And this will illustrate where we're coming from. All right, so in our work, which began with the first Little Free Library back in the mid-90s, the organization itself, Little Free Library, came about 13 years later after they visited our first installations in Portland, where we had already begun a network of these little interactive libraries. Basically, in gentrified neighborhoods, people were taking stuff from the ruins of you know, historic buildings and then making these interactive installations out in the streets. And I just want to make the point here that the things that we're talking about around expressing ecological values and placemaking and youth engagement and stewardship and, you know, an ecological vision and more, like non-monetary economies, for instance, are all exhibited even at small scales like this. And what's so exciting is that, of course, this kind of project replicates across the world because it does all of those things all within this very small, doable scale that even kids can participate in. But the plan that we've been working on the whole time, and this is just an illustration of one of our event posters, is to inspire an effect of engagement. Like what is the root cause? What is the root issue in our society we have to somehow manage to address? What is the pressure point or the tipping point that we have to find in order to effect a broad scale activation? The answer, we asked that question, and the answers that we've come up with really are kind of lead to the same, you know, it leads to place. People getting off the couch, coming outside, doing things if only for their own self-interest to impact their community, if only to come out and say, hey, I want to have a say too. So, you know, our most famous projects are where people just do placemaking immediately outside of their homes or in the intersections and streets. Literally at this point in Portland's history, all of the residential intersections and all of the streets are now available for communities to recreate them for free. This broad spectrum of kind of installations that you can just automatically, you can build and you're automatically permitted and insured without even telling the city that you've done it. So that's this whole other story that we can talk more about later. But this image of Portland, Oregon's downtown shows the retrofit of existing buildings, lots of adaptive reuse, but basically on all surfaces that are available, you know, growing, carbon sequestering, you know, biomass that also not incidentally, is part of an urban agriculture infrastructure and an overall passive approach to meeting our needs in terms of energy. And you might say, well, we can't possibly do that for everything that we do in the society. And I would say that's probably true within that mindset that we have so much to do. And I think the flip side of that idea is that we also have so much not to do. Like we work too damn hard and our own work is what is destroying the world. So there's a lot to say about that. But this shows streets filled with people, not just for an event where we close the streets, but because we've localized living and working so utterly that you almost don't need cars. I really am not being naive when I'm talking about this, and I'll kind of prove what I'm talking about in these next few slides. What we're also ultimately talking about is addressing the fact that neighborhood by neighborhood, Americans are not affecting the barn raising, which was perhaps the most kind of primordial annual event of convergence, you know, of all human history, to come together to do things that bring us all together, and we join all of our skill sets together. We do something that really becomes very easy then, even if it's monumental in scale, and then we party and we celebrate and we make new children out of all of that gathering, and on and on. I think that this was the great pulse of cultural evolution that's been largely interrupted in the North American context especially. But all of our work is predicated on re-engendering that social organism, again, to be not just an individuated person, but part of a greater whole that you can feel and see. We're addressing a context of designed isolation, where to find a bench that's just for sitting in the urban environment is almost a miracle, like just for sitting, not even associated with a bus stop, just to allow someone to rest, who might be an old lady, for instance, walking home from work or from the store, bringing food home and has nowhere to rest her weary, aching arms and carrying all these groceries. Like the isolation of the American neighborhood it's characterized by the fact that we have the fewest outdoor gathering places of all first world nations, because we are the expression of development interests and processes that haven't valued and wanted to support dynamic social space. If you're familiar with the idea of food deserts, you obviously know something of what I'm talking about. But in the American circumstance, you might scarcely even value the idea that there might be a commons where people can go and feel that they belong. So we've been sparking these all over the city, hundreds of times in Portland, and then now hundreds of times in other cities across the continent. And what happens is an epiphany. It's that shock. It's that kind of chrysalis transformation of imaginal selves, where people suddenly realize that the world can be different. I think this is tremendously valuable insight that we've been gaining on how change can become, and even rapid change can become possible. And of course, we're facing, gigantic patterns that are, if we even really understood them, it might be too insurmountable to even begin doing this kind of work. Okay, at the local level, we're not just kind of piecemeal transforming spaces. We're actually reconsidering the fabric of entire neighborhoods to kind of affect a revillaging effect. Here we are looking at my neighborhood, and we just use pieces of paper in a design dialogue to describe the major streets, the commercial corridors, and the historic boundary of the neighborhood, just identifying the context as it is. What can we do to embellish that boundary? Some of you watching this might realize I'm referring to Kevin Lynch's placemaking formula from the image of the city, and ours is an adapted and expanded version. These green circles call out the gateways in and out of the neighborhood to celebrate passage, and this is partly to engender pride, but really to develop a larger kind of community sense of self and identity. The orange circles are obviously calling out the major crossroads that haven't been embellished with a sense of place, and so those become strategic leverage points. All of these are about strategic leverage points so far. These yellow bits are basically major things that are happening in the neighborhood that had never been thought of as a greater whole. So part of our challenge then is to develop a pathway infrastructure that connects them in terms of how the neighborhood thinks of these spaces. And this is all to get us ready for embellishing these tipping points, these leverage points, and then filling in the kind of insulae between the streets with our placemaking intensity. So our intent is to transform the development neighborhood of just the ordinary set of patterns with a new sensibility that is also actually quite ancient. And all these little blue squares are just calling out the really special things that people have been working on for a long time that we're going to augment with even more special things. So boundaries, gateways, nodes of activity, village centers or village hearts, and then expressions of story. These are the constituents of the most robust public or villages in the history of the world, where you can see this continuity and robustness of culture and even economy exhibited over time. This is looking at it at a block scale, where some of our students have been designing as a social justice initiative, designing master plans, with the people who own and rent these houses, so that the block can cohere into a larger whole of connecting features and pathways that are also complementary, so that people are encouraged to share. And not just that block, but all the blocks around it. This image on the upper left shows a model that we've built with the neighbors, identifying how all of those things actually become finally manifest together into a coherent whole. And then here's just some of the fun things that the neighbors have been building. What I'm showing you is an infrastructure to address climate change while you lower crime, while you thrive in terms of all kinds of mental and physical health and community health scale statistics. And while you provide, kind of experimental small housing, community gathering places like a sauna, you take down fences to put in pathways. This effect, first of all, engenders a stabilization so that people don't tend to move anymore because now they feel connected. They're part of a greater whole. So they don't need to go finding that greater whole elsewhere because they've already found it with the social living culture around them. I mentioned a zero carbon nursery school. Here's a picture of it. I mentioned the doctor's office. That's in the upper left, and the upper right, there's the doctor. Lots of ecological innovation becomes inspired through all this connection. Like the first legal straw bale structure in the history of the cities down here in the lower right. Speaking of ecological innovation, all of these are small scale little infill prototypes that people have managed to build and fund by themselves that are part of the process, part of the expression of this kind of rising sense of possibility and excitement. Now, to address climate change, you obviously need ecological innovation. There's lots of things that we know that we need. We need to reduce, we need to prototype better ways, newer ways, low carbon ways, but we also need a culture that is excited and feels a sense of possibility to make that happen. And I argue that that is more fundamental. Urban agriculture, we haven't even left the block. This is all in the same block. Urban agriculture infrastructure being inspired. And this is where neighbors are planting things and harvesting things together, come back to the barn raising, back to the harvest festival. When people do these things together, those rituals seem to automatically return, almost as if there's a clock inside of us that's been awakened. This is a fabulous chicken palace. Here again is that image kind of with a more close-up view. You can see that people are planning on messing with the streets. And out in the streets, there's more shared transportation infrastructure than private. And that's the people living here making those decisions. So this is what they would choose to do to themselves. Solar systems, electricity, hot water on the rooftops. Now this set of images I'm about to show you is where the Rockefeller Foundation actually funded us as part of the Resilient by Design Bay Area Challenge to propose different community building, carbon reduction, sort of thriving oriented revillaging projects. And this is looking at the basic prototype of Vallejo, where you just see the prototypical block is retrofit with placemaking that brings people together. And all of these other systems follow after that, including annual and perennial agriculture, solar and electric and hot water production, composting systems, even humanure systems, and water catchment, gray water, and the infill housing is in the red. So you can see that's kind of happening all over the place. And the goal is to create a new economy and a new political context that enables them to have the redundancy that a culture must have in order to survive the failure of any centralized system. And of course, the idea is that this gets scaled up through all means necessary so that it starts to replicate and inspire other cities. So this was something that we presented to Rockefeller and the Bay Area communities as part of the Resilient by Design initiative. Community power in public space. There is nothing like it to transform the entire city. This place has become a nexus that has attracted interest and visitors from literally all over the world to come see this and then go elsewhere to replicate it. This is the first one in Southeast Portland that has now been replicating in many other cities. And when I say replicate, I don't mean that it's the same. I mean that the concept of repurposing, public space, which has a narrow focus and might be only monocultural, serving mostly just cars, becomes repurposed as a cultural continuum and really restored to what it used to be before 1920, when very unjustly the federal government decided that streets were just for cars and invented the crime of jaywalking. Here's a larger vision. NAHEAD has never gotten together to just ask, what would a better world look like? Specifically, this workshop was, what would world peace look like? Then maybe it's time that people did that. This was an open-ended conversation where people were just talking, they were making lists on the walls and people were doing sketches, and we had a session for breakout groups, and then everyone reported back, and all of this was assembled into a series of images. The image in the lower right is one of the holy grails of, I think, of a better world, towards a better world, but also toward carbon reduction. It's the idea of spot zoning, so that pedestrian-based commercial activity can happen within the neighborhood context, so people can build actually right almost up to their property lines, maybe some kind of setback, but with a limited commercial use at an appropriate scale. so that we start to, instead of like dreaming of 20-minute neighborhoods, we talk about perhaps a 5-minute neighborhood, perhaps a 2-minute neighborhood, like where you don't have to get in your car at all, and you wouldn't tend to think of it ever as an alternative, because basically everyone around you has the skills and talents that you need to tap into. Remarkable creativity. And so this is to enable that creativity to be expressed, to act as a node for a nexus for more to happen, but certainly to localize our consumption patterns and probably to inspire reduction. Toward that, these kinds of things are happening. Solar-powered 24-hour self-service tea station. Now, this is an invention of several families and built on one of the corners of this first installation. All these kids got together and built tables and chairs. One of the wonderful outcomes of this is that vandalism just simply doesn't happen anymore within this neighborhood, especially within the radius of the most involvement of children. They've learned that they can actually, okay, vandalism to me, I'll just say this conclusion, vandalism is happening in this world because this stuff isn't happening. Once this stuff happens, then the proclivity that youth have to express themselves and be part of a larger dialogue gets accommodated. And so that's what you're seeing here. And then that inspires all these other things to happen. And these are longer stories I can tell today, but it took just a few people to convince the city council to enable people to put in raised planters with free permits all over the city, to transform the right of way into a place for food security. And and now we're planting fruit and nut trees within the right of way that has grass strips of a certain minimum width. So on and on. What is the catalyst though that can lead to all of these changes? Like now we can install little libraries and kiosks all over the city, free of permit, automatically insured without even giving the city notification that we've done it. Because when the city sees that things go better after these things are created, risk managers are able to assure them that having these happen without our interfering or controlling or regulating or creating any cost obstructions, which is an equity issue, is a good idea. All these things are free of permit. They're all available for people to build as prototypes that have already been approved. Solar-powered cob kiosks for information, covered bike parking facilities in the residential street grid. It is now legal to compost anywhere in the residential right-of-way free of permit. That's one of the big ones that we've been needing for a long time. So yeah, places to sit, places to gather, places to grow food. Some absurdly beautiful things like this newspaper dispenser, which appropriately looks like a beehive, but it's for the local paper in this neighborhood called The Bee. So of course you would house it in a hive, and that was the inspiration of kids who then built this installation. Now this is a larger public space. These, I'm showing you a bunch of stuff that might seem a little too granular, a little too hairy to some people. These same principles, the same idea that there's value in public space actually expressing who we have become in the 21st century is incalculably important. It's not just to reduce our impact, but who have we become? This kind of process that we facilitated in the city north of Portland is what it looks like to value diversity, to be inclusive, to be a more equitable society with an ecological set of values. And this drawing, there's a lot to say about this. And the fact that it has totem poles is part of that, the community fabric having a voice. But all the features and functions that are here are spectacular and they're innovative, and they're really like nothing that's been seen before. And you get in and you see how it works. The fact that it reaches out into the intersection to create a place that unifies this small town is part of the expression of those values. Who have we become? Let's not fly off to some Gothic realm that was made in the 15th century in order to see what a decent public space looks like. The horizon is broad and the opportunities are so endless that an American should just jump out of their bed in the morning getting ready to reinvent public space, because we have never seen the kind of public spaces that we are capable of creating now that express who we have become. That's one of the great tragedies of failing as a society. If we don't get to that point, then we'll never know the answer to that question. Okay, back to the Bay Area Challenge. Here we are as a team repurposing Mare Island across from Vallejo, repurposing perhaps 3 million square feet or something like that of naval, just neglected naval architecture into multifamily, living wage, integrated living and working environments where people can be in villages with their family. We're talking about immigrants and homeless people that can come and be part of these, basically, they're agri-hoods, agriculturally focused neighborhoods. And there's a lot in this plan to repurpose one of the clusters of buildings into an ecological arts center. The top of the island becomes an educational facility for learning about sustainability and modeling it, so on and on. And here's just some closer in images of buildings that used to be about building boats, naval infrastructure, and instead becoming places where people can live and work and grow food and kind of thrive together. It's a very permacultural approach. How do we take all of these vexing challenges and underutilized or abandoned infrastructure and bring them together to actually serve the needs of the larger region of the Bay that is desperately in need of, say, water catchment facilities, gray water facilities in a drought-stricken region, the kind of stuff that we need to easily retrofit the rooftops of homes and businesses and larger buildings, even the surfaces of parking lots to become water catchment systems again. Speaking of that, here's a proposal that Rockefeller also paid for to repurpose the majority of San Francisco, not repurpose it, but transform the sewer, which is designed to eliminate water, to instead turn it into a giant water catchment system so we can actually use that infrastructure to capture water. And then, obviously we would have to do a lot of work to make the system clean enough to accommodate water, and so that we could have a good starting place to then filter the water and store it for use. But San Francisco catches the amount of water it gets every year. It actually could catch enough to meet all of its needs through the rest of the year if we just thought of it more creatively and started with a different set of assumptions. But then everything you can conceive of starts to happen within this design. Repurposing public spaces, doing the things that we already know are possible within domestic and commercial, residential and commercial circumstances, to just install systems that are so easy and basically passively fed, most of them passive systems, to not just meet human needs, but also bank that water in the ground instead of trying to get rid of it all the time. Transforming certain areas like parking lots into giant underground cisterns, and transforming parking lots into places for market activities and such. So it's a larger holistic vision. Here's an entire kind of educational campus being transformed into same amount of trees, but now they grow food. Now they grow nuts for carbohydrates and proteins that we might desperately end up needing in case of the failure of other systems. Okay, so I'll just wind down. All this work inspires work at every scale that people can affect within the spheres of their influence, like to transform this apartment building and the houses around them into an urban agriculture paradise that is actually characterized by a cooperative culture. I can go on about this one for hours. Kailash Eco Village. One of the founding employees of Microsoft that lives just outside of Portland decides to create a prototype for urban agriculture, to inspire a revolution across the country. This is called Our Table at ourtable.org. You can find out more about this permaculture dedicated farm. So much innovation, like to combine co-housing with autistic people and have them be supported to be self-directed and actually owning their own circumstance. And permaculture being the means through which they actually steward the landscape and build community with each other. This is not naive work. This is working with specialists to design this kind of thing. Working with people contending with Asperger's to take the same approach on a larger piece of land, 25 acres in this case, to design a village for people to use an ecological curriculum like permaculture as a means of helping them to learn how to really work in a more socially demanding atmosphere when they return back to their homes. There's tons to say about all of these prototypes. Urban infill co-housing, here's a more dense version, but where we're bringing into the neighborhood grid where people don't tend to collaborate. You guys know all about this in Davis. Don't say too much more, but collaborative cultures that inspire other people around them. And of course, we've been doing this with houseless communities for more than 2 decades. This is Dignity Village, kind of the flagship for the rest of the country in terms of a so-called approved, stable community that has inspired, many other different forms of this kind of same DIY, tiny home-based village by and for homeless people. This one costs, I think, $3.50 a night to run per person. compared to more than $100 for a government shelter. That doesn't do nearly as many things for the community. There's a lot to say about this one. Okay, and then I'll just end quickly. This is just looking at the urban agriculture infrastructure of the city, beginning with the fact that we have held our boundary, our urban growth boundary that grows very slowly, but it basically tries to contain growth and enable growth to happen in a logical and planned way. But that's part of our agriculture infrastructure within which we're growing. And I'm depicting this using food. The red lentils are the boundary, and the sunflowers are community gardens. The green ones are major private gardens. I mean, the green lentils. Just every layer of this has to do with a different kind of initiative, like urban food forests, nonprofits that are working, the location of nonprofits designated by mushrooms, the urban food security, the food security council with these hazelnuts clustered around the city council and the mayor. There's something going on with every one of these slides I'm showing that I'm depicting, but it basically becomes just a huge freaking salad. And that's not even including all the things that I showed you before, which at this point number in literally the thousands upon thousands of initiatives. So if we have one shared value in this city, it is that we have a right to participate in all things. And that culture of participation can move very slowly. But I think when people say that democracy needs to take a long time, they're talking about when you're making decisions, perhaps, but the enacting of the decisions, where you consensus on a vision together, even as a local unit where you're practicing these really powerful ideas, then you go out and act on behalf of it. And you're excited, you care more about the world, you care more about each other, and so you act on each other's behalf in a way that is actually incredibly expressive, completely irrepressible. And I think that it'll be part of how we save our world. So at this point, I will stop the share and just say thank you for your attention. And I look forward to having a conversation with you at some future point. All right, thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right. Wow, that was fantastic. So much information from Mark. So if you have questions, obviously Mark is not participating live, so but we'll have other folks that might be willing to sort of take a stab at some of the answers to some of the questions people might have, or we can certainly get follow-up answers from Mark as well. But if you have questions, please get those in the chat. And so now we're going to actually switch over to our sort of response panel. And that includes three neighborhood leaders, local Davis neighborhood leaders in their own right. Cathy Forkas from Old East Davis, Emily Griswold from Davis Manor neighborhood, and Elizabeth Lasensky from Rancho Yolo. And each of these panelists were asked to reflect on what they heard today and answer following questions in a 2 to 3 minute time frame. But if you could please introduce yourselves and your neighborhood and then make a few comments on the following questions. If you could give us some responses as what came to mind from hearing ideas presented today, either from your own experience in the neighborhood engagement, placemaking, resilience, or what you might consider doing next. And there's a few questions here of how today's presentation stimulated your thinking about the importance of neighborhood resilience. What ideas have you heard that could be useful in building resilience where you live? And how might you start conversations and collaborations with your neighbors to enhance resilience? And for everyone else, please think about how you might answer these questions as we listen. And then, of course, we're going to open up in just a few minutes to the Q&A to answer questions that have already been put forward in the chat and other questions people might have. Thanks very much. I guess either whoever wants to go first, Cathy or Emily, Elizabeth, however you want to go ahead.
I can go ahead. I'm from Old East Davis, and just a short description. We're a mixture of all kinds of things in the neighborhood. We've got small home businesses, we have small grocery, we have various neighborhood businesses and storefronts, restaurants, small grocery, as I mentioned. We've had a neighborhood association since the 80s. our housing is equally mixed. We have single family homes, but a lot of ADUs. We have apartment buildings. We have low income housing apartments. And then we have, we've had a co-op in the neighborhood, the Solar Community Housing Association co-op housing since I'm thinking the 90s. And then more recently in the last 10 or 15 years, the neighborhood supported moving homes from going to be demolished down out to the neighborhood, and SCHA expanded with 2 additional co-ops that are actually very innovative in use, insulation, kind of all the latest, ceiling underneath the homes, and a lot of innovation as far as being really resilient and sustainable as housing. Also low income, just from by nature of the model. Let's see. So what we have in our neighborhood, interestingly, we also have a mixture of people. So there's a lot of students. There's a lot of long-term renters, as in been living in the neighborhood for 25 or 30 years and renting. Homeowners. What else was I going to say about that? A lot of people live and work in the neighborhood. I myself have a cabinet business that I've had for 30, 35 years building in the neighborhood, and there's others like me. And then lots of people that live in the neighborhood work downtown, walk downtown, bike to UCD. A lot of neighbors work at UCD. So we have a little bit of a reflection of what Mark Lakeman was talking about, having a little, a 2-minute, 5-minute neighborhood where, we can get groceries and basics and, get our windows rescreened and any number of things done, just within a little microcosm. We have some very interesting things done, like on the bottom end of J Street, where one neighbor is going and just taking every apron space and making it into food producing garden. He's done one side of one block, and now he's moved across the street. John is doing the other side of the street, producing all kinds of food down there. It's awesome. There's I think one of the co-ops also does like gleaning and community food security, storage of food, and going out into the neighborhoods to harvest foods around town. So we've done some placemaking. Mark Lakeman came and we did the first street mural that he helped inspire us on that. Unfortunately, it got torn up with all the PG&E work, which is a shame because Mark Rivero was helped us put it together, but we'll be repainting it this year. So anyway, it's a wonderful neighborhood. What everybody what the speakers make me think of is thinking bigger, bringing more people into the conversation. So we have a neighborhood association, but I think we need to do more outreach and reach more of the people in the neighborhood, and have more events that bring people out. COVID's really shut down a lot of things, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to bringing more of the neighborhood out and engaging them in projects. And a lot of what we've done is problem solving for things that were affecting our neighborhood, and then working on beautifying the neighborhood. So I just think we could think bigger, and everything can be more inclusive and more beautiful. And the energy, the idea of transforming the energy. And also I'd really like to do outreach with neighbors on how to start electrifying and making the energy use a lot more efficient, making it very, very easy to get that information to people, and including the details of cost and who can do it within the community. So I think that's about it for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cathy. Appreciate that. Emily, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Lucas. Yeah, so I live in the Davis Manor neighborhood, and the Davis Manor Neighborhood Council has been around for a bit over 20 years. And we are near the shopping center that has like the dollar store and Symposium and grocery outlet. So there is a small shopping center in the neighborhood, Da Vinci High School, and then we have, it's mainly single family homes. We do have some multifamily and some duplexes in our neighborhood. And we have been really inspired by Mark Lakeman's work. So like Old East Davis, we also have worked on really thinking about how to reclaim public space for gathering. And so we did a street mural at Duke and M, and we've been inspired by, for a long time, by this vision of really kind of breaking down this social isolation and connecting, building these social ties, and at the same time looking at how to, in strengthening our culture, also strengthening kind of the ecological resilience of the neighborhood. And so that has happened in kind of these local economy ways, like with our, winter bazaar, where, just like local neighbors selling, their own products to neighbors for our holiday season, but also, celebrating our public spaces. And one of the things that I was reflecting on was just how important the social connections are, and the challenges that COVID has placed on that. So that has kind of broken down some of our ties. But before COVID, we had a monthly neighborhood happiness hour, which was a nice casual way of neighbors getting together and just having conversations, which I think is a really important foundation. Like, those social connections are an important foundation for any kind of collaborative work. And so I feel very fortunate that even before I moved to this neighborhood, there was the beginning of this infrastructure. So having a listserv, having a Facebook group, having a Nextdoor group, having these happiness hours, that has created this infrastructure for us to talk with each other about our aspirations, that has then led to more ambitious projects. So I'm really grateful to Lucas for his support in our work on re-envisioning N Street Park, and really developing a neighborhood-based redesign for that, and thinking about how to bring more habitat into our public spaces. I guess another thing that I was thinking about was just the different approaches of, like, to have the amazing resources of a university to really concentrate intensive amounts of funding on a block, and that level of resource allocation. We do have the potential with UC Davis here to have some pretty innovative partnerships, but then to have this grassroots piece from Mark Lakeman. And I think what's inspiring about that is that you don't need $1.5 million to start doing some of these things. And so every time I hear him speak, I'm reminded of, like, oh, what are the little things that we can do? And one of the little things that has been happening, just even with neighborhood email list traffic, is one of our neighbors is very passionate about wildlife habitat, and has been, organizing, like, let's help support building habitat for pipevine swallowtail butterflies in our neighborhood. So I am going to be getting a bunch of these pipevine plants. Who wants to go in with me on getting a pipevine plant so that we can build habitat across our neighborhood? So things like that, with trees, with these habitat providing plants, I think these are all just little ways that we can help build resilience. But this whole thing was very inspiring to me. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. Appreciate all your insights and comments. Elizabeth, you are our final response panelist.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have been asked to focus in on what ideas I gathered from these presentations, and I'm going to have I'm going to have to assume that you know something about Rancho Yellow, but we already have many of these things in place. COVID really took a bite out of our social fabric, but it's still there. And we're fortunate that we have our homes are built around circles and we have paths. We have a clubhouse where we can gather. So we already have those things. What is different about us is that we own our homes, but we do not own the land. And so that presents us with unique problems and challenges. One of those is many of our homes cannot support solar rooftops. So we're looking at other solutions. We would love this person from Oakland to come in or something like that, to come in and give us an assessment of how we could aggregate all of the possible places where we could put up solar and have batteries so that we could all access that energy when we need it. But we currently can't do that. And I'd also like to know what happens when people sell their homes and you already have these structures there. So there are a lot of legal things that I'm trying to get my head around. But and I would also love to have a full assessment of what we could do in terms of saving water. What are all the things we could do? I mean, those are the bigger issues because we're already doing so many of the other things. I would like us to think of on a slightly different scale. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. Yes, we could put up carport. We already have carports and we have trellises, but in many cases, the carports are still not sturdy enough to hold the solar panels. And some people are willing to put up trellises, but we have a different permitting structure for mobile home parks than the rest of you do. We have to go through state permitting. So that is currently cumbersome. We're trying to work with the state on expediting and with the permits and coming up with new regulations on solar. So we're a little different than most of the rest of the city.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for your comments. I would just, and thoughts. I think now we're going to move to the Q&A. I'm not sure who is. I think maybe Lorenzo has sort of questions from the queue that if he's willing to sort of start with those. We're going to be wrapping up soon. Presentations maybe went a little longer than we anticipated, but we're going to do some Q&A and then we will be getting out, finishing the event here in 5 to 10 minutes from now. Lorenzo.
Okay, well, I'm just looking at the chat. There have been a number of people that asked questions in the chat, and some of them actually got answered. But there was one directed to Sascha. Maybe I'll start there, from Tom Phillips, who asked about how have you factored in climate change projections for longer, hotter, and more frequent heat waves, cooling demands expected to increase, and the ongoing mega drought. And then part 2 of that, if EcoBlock model was scaled up to statewide, what are the total potential carbon and energy savings? Can you comment on that, Sascha?
Yes, Lorenzo, and I typed a brief answer into the chat. We have not done, I mean, unless Lawrence Berkeley Lab has done some work that I'm not aware of, which is entirely possible because I'm not aware of everything. There's so many collaborators, but I don't think we've done a rigorous study that includes forecasted climate change in the sort of degree days of heating and cooling, to sort of look at how that will impact the actual heating and cooling energy use, and how will that affect the overall calculation for the carbon footprint. So that's still work to be done. In phase 1 of the project, there were some initial estimates. Again, I don't that had to be sort of by necessity a little bit vague because it didn't have the specific block that we're actually physically working with. So I think that's a lot of good work to come. I mean, I'm always, to be honest, very skeptical, or, you know, take with a big grain of salt, extrapolations of what would this look like if we rolled it out to the entire county or state and whatnot. I think it's important to do that to really generate the vision of what's possible. And, you know, in reality, there are going to be so many different types of adoptions and variations on the theme. It's hard to put numbers to it. Our real focus is to create enough of a solid financial model and legal model that it becomes doable, and then hope that a lot of inspired people and perhaps, you know, nonprofit organizations will pick it up and run with it once we have done this very time-consuming and expensive groundwork of sort of building the first exemplar and maybe the first few exemplars. Then in the future, they can point to it and say, you know, here's how we can organize ourselves. Here's how we can do an efficient design that, you know, saves on, you know, saves by standardization, basically. So I'm less focused on making the academic argument of what is to be gained or achieved with a certain size scale up. I'm totally focused on the practical aspect of let's make a scale up possible and let this thing take on a dynamic of its own.
Thanks. I'm not seeing other questions in the chat, so maybe with the few minutes remaining, we can just invite anyone who wants to ask a question to unmute themselves and speak.
Hey, Tom here. I was just wondering for some of the projects that we're looking into for our, you know, mid-50s house that's been retrofitted in various ways, and for neighbors that are interested, say, in replacing old water heaters that are near end of life, or getting solar shade screens and things. What's the possibility of doing group purchases or technical support or whatever it is to accelerate or you know, grease the skids for a lot of these things? Because otherwise it's all just kind of done piecemeal in vacuums where people don't necessarily, you know what their options are and what the best approaches are. And, you know, a lot of these homes are, you know, they're pretty similar situations. Maybe you run into electrical panel issues if you're doing heat pumps or something, but for other things, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think I live in one of those homes as well, built in the 1950s and ready for retrofits. Chris, maybe I'll call on you and you'd like to say a little bit about the Cool Davis program that's looking into housing retrofits and trying to create information.
Yeah, so we've started a process with some workshops. We're calling them our Make a Plan workshops, mostly focused on home energy, and specifically having added kind of a curriculum around getting off of natural gas. And our latest workshop was offered on August 1st, and we'll have the video from that up soon. But our plan is to roll this out in a way, of course, this was our planning pre-COVID, which has been, you know, kind of modified, was to begin to work at different levels. I really appreciated Lorenzo's introduction of that layered look at our world, because that's the way Cool Davis has been thinking about how we look at our greenhouse gas responsibilities, all the way up from our individual level to our household, to our neighborhood, to our community, and beyond. And we think that there's two places we really want to work, and one is at neighborhood level, and starting to really look at the potential for things like group buying, working with a collection of contractors on addressing like houses and their circumstances. But also working especially with our faith communities and other community organizations as an access point to do some kind of smaller group discussions using some of the tools that we have now with Zoom, but being able to really take something like the Mark Lakeman presentation and then go deeper. And I think I would encourage those of you who are here today that are involved in your neighborhood associations to think about taking some of this content and using it as a tool for some closer discussions. We're in the middle of the climate action planning process, and I know that Carrie Lux was on the list here earlier. I'm not sure if she's still here with us right now, but we're in the middle of the climate action planning process where these kinds of ideas would be very helpful to thinking about, the next steps post as we look at implementation of the plan, but also thinking about how these kinds of ideas might affect the way we plan when we start looking at a general plan, and how we do neighborhood planning, where we get our neighbors, neighborhoods thinking in very creative ways about how to do problem solving and what they want their neighborhood to look like in the future. So I think I found this set of presentations very uplifting and hopeful for our future. Thanks, Lorenzo.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Carrie, I just saw you appear and I wondered if you wanted to respond on anything here.
Thanks, Lorenzo. No, I just was, I've been listening the whole time, and I just really appreciate the specifics about some of these projects, because as we're working on the climate action and adaptation plan, it's great to say have more neighborhood resiliency. And I know, Lorenzo, you've done your presentation previously, and it's been great to see that. But seeing some of these things being applied in different ways and hearing people's thoughts about them is so helpful as we go from the sort of brainstorming idea generation phase of the CAP into the evaluation process and selecting some of these actions to put in. So I just want to say thank you to Cool Davis and to all the speakers and moderators and panelists. This has been really, really useful. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carrie. Does anyone else want to add anything at this point, a comment or a question?
It just occurred to me, I wonder if there would be a way to actually have like just popped into my head to have like a neighborhood, a trained neighborhood person, who didn't run a business retrofitting houses, but knew, like, for instance, how a heat pump worked and what circumstances it would, work for, to be able to go to a home where someone was curious about it and be able to kind of explain where it might go and how it might work. It's still really confusing to me, and I've read a lot. It would be interesting to get people kind of trained as like little ambassadors that went around neighborhoods and had little meetings where they could really walk people's houses and explain where the units might go and how it might work,
So Cathy, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's exactly the model that Cool Davis has been working on, is developing ambassadors to do that kind of work.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's something about the one, you look at your own house and try to figure out, like, where would it go? How would it work? How do the ducts go? And it just seems a little overwhelming. And then you bring someone in who sells it, it's a different experience than bringing someone in who just knows a lot and can kind of give you a footprint of how it would work. So anyway, cool. Thank you.
Something that really stuck with me from seeing Mark's presentation and all the different images that he showed was how much we take for granted that our neighborhood looks the way it is and it's always going to be that way. That's almost like an implicit assumption that we make about the neighborhood that we live in. And what he's demonstrated, and what some of us have demonstrated to an extent where we've done things, is that we don't have to make that assumption. And in fact, that assumption is imprisoning, that we have the capability of getting together and envisioning alternatives and then actually doing them, actually implementing them. So I agree that, just to put in my own 2 cents, that doing things at the individual household level are good, but they're not enough. That we really need to, and I was just reading in a book about organizing the other day, the author said, we don't really know how to do democracy. We don't really know how to come together and make decisions collectively. And I think that's part of what we can invent, and doesn't need to be quite so intimidating if we start with just some practical things that are enhancements at the very local level, working with a few of our neighbors to do that. So I hope folks have taken some inspiration from the things that we saw today. And I guess it's almost 6:40. I'll ask if there are any last questions or comments anyone else has to make at this point. And if not, I'll hand it back to Lucas, I guess, to close.
Yeah, I think we're a tag team with Chris. So, well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. And just wanted to, thank everybody. There's such a lot of Team Davis involvement with this, or Team Davis, excuse me, Cool Davis involvement. There's a team from Cool Davis involvement with this. And I think Chris might have a few final thoughts as well. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating this evening.
Thank you, Lucas. It's always great to have you MC one of our events, because you are so deeply embedded in the work that we're doing, both here as well as regionally. I really want to call out Robin and Lorenzo, really helping out with reaching out and getting our speakers for tonight and helping with logistics. Both I and Leslie were on vacation the last 2 weeks, and so it was a little more challenging to get everything together. So I just really appreciate your help. And then behind the scenes, Richard Bode and Jan have been helping out on the just making sure that things are working and we're tracking your questions. So I just appreciate the panelists also who joined us to give us your impressions and thoughts. It's really helpful to the discussion. So, and Sascha and Lorenzo, again, thank you for your really interesting presentations and thought-provoking for all of us as we kind of move forward on a lot of our planning here in this community. So thank you very much. And we'll be sending out the video as soon as it gets posted, so you'll be able to share it with your neighbors and friends. Please do.
Thanks, Chris, for all you do too. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris. Good night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks all for participating. Have a good evening.
For organizing.
Thanks. Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.